Good evening, folks. I'm Pastor Jim Thomas from Nashville, Tennessee, and welcome to Friday Night Chats. So glad you could join us. Alongside me tonight, the curate here at the Village Chapel, Kim Thomas. Kim, wave to everybody there if you can. And our special guest tonight will be Malcolm Guite. He's an English poet. He is on faculty and staff at University of Cambridge, and as well is world-renowned poet, really, and author of several books. And we're going to be posting some of the graphics from those up on the screen. But we're really excited to talk to him about David's Crown, which is his latest book, and it features the Psalms and his responses to the Psalms. So welcome, Malcolm. Where are you talking to us from?
Thank you. Well, I'm talking to you from my study in the little village of Linton, which is about 9 miles outside of Cambridge. And obviously in lockdown, haven't been able to go into the university at all, but I'm doing my thinking and writing and teaching from this nice study.
Yeah.
Surrounded by my beloved books.
That's so wonderful.
Well, not all of them, of course. I wish I could pack more of them in.
It looks very inviting.
Yeah, we've been tracking with you on your YouTube channel in that same room. I didn't know what town it was in, but we've been tracking with you on the YouTube channel, just enjoying your readings.
Yeah.
Matter of fact,
well, thank you. In a way, I kind of invented that almost. Well, it was really because I was missing what usually happens when I'm in my study in my college in Girton in Cambridge. It's apart from, official appointments, whatever, students just knock on the door and wander in, and I have a chat with them, and I say, oh, have you read this? And I pull a volume of Yeats off and I just do that naturally, and it's a very much part of the flow and how things are done in Cambridge. We do kind of one-to-one teaching, and some of it's really quite informal. It's pursuing the joy or the truth or the beauty of the thing together without any vulgar expectation of examination or anything. We're just doing it for the thing. And I really missed that. So I thought, well, why don't I just do that? And my wife, Maggie, has kindly acted as the sort of proxy for all my possible visitors, and she walks in and knocks on the door, and that's how we do it.
And occasionally we see your friend George there, the four-legged friend.
Oh, yes. Yes, my lovely greyhound. Yeah, he quite likes to be in there sometimes. He stretches. He's a great, huge, long greyhound, so he stretches himself out over the floor, and you have to tread delicately over him.
Wow.
It's actually his library.
Yes, exactly. Yes, other people are allowed in occasionally. Well, yeah, he's a great comfort person.
Well, Malcolm, let's talk about David's Crown a little bit and your interest in the Psalms.
It was extraordinary. I mean, as a priest in the Church of England, of course, we have what we call the daily office, where you're saying morning and evening prayer, either privately or in a church or in your college chapel or wherever it is. And there's a lectionary, and the Psalter, the Book of Psalms, is set. So you say a certain number of Psalms morning and evening. And that's a tradition, of course, that goes right back even before the Reformation. I mean, it's at the core of the Benedictine life, and it goes, of course, back deeper into the New Testament. Jesus is constantly reciting the Psalms. The words of Psalm 22 are on his lips as he's dying. He refers to Psalm 8, when he's debating with the Pharisees. They're part of his language of devotion. So, of course, when you're praying the Psalms, you're using Jesus' own prayer book in many respects, and of course he's prophesied in it. But and obviously the recitation of the Psalms goes right back to the temple, and the Psalter as we have it was probably, as it were, the kind of hymn book of the Second Temple. But so that's part of the routine. Yeah. But routine is the issue. In one sense, it's great to be familiar with the Psalms, but the real problem is that you can become over-familiar. You can say things by rote. You can go through the motions a little bit. And one of the things I discovered during lockdown, during the whole coming of the pandemic, and the way that forced so many issues into the light for us and confronted us with fundamental questions of life and death, also of community and belonging. Yeah. I suddenly found that I couldn't just rattle through the morning Psalms as had been my habit. I was convicted that I had, been rattling through them too quickly, and the Psalms began to speak very directly to me. I really found them piercing. Wow. Cardinal Newman's motto was cor ad cor loquitur, which means heart speaks unto heart. And I really began to recognize that right there at the heart of the Bible, in this great collection of poetry, God had given us heart language. You know, he'd given us the real language we need to open our hearts to him, and the language in which we can see his heart opening to us.
Yeah.
And to be given that, it suddenly, as I say, it came alive. It spoke directly into the contemporary situation. So I began to pay much more attention to them. And, you know, the first psalm, obviously, about the blessed is them being like the tree planted by the water. And it talks about in his law, he shall exercise himself day and night. That's what the Coverdale translation says. And I began to think, just as I was taking a daily exercise walking, and in fact walking by the little stream here where there are trees planted by the water and contemplating, that maybe I should exercise myself poetically in a new response to the Psalms and keep, as it were, in verse, a kind of prayer journal about the way the Psalms had come alive. And I had no other view. And because there are 150 Psalms, and I decided to write this particular poetic form, which is quite demanding and is 15-line poems in tertia rima, all in iambic pentameter and rhymed. I mean, they're not jottings. I imagined that this project was going to take me 2 or 3 years. And I didn't even know whether it would necessarily be a thing I could publish. I was really doing it as a spiritual exercise. But I was soon gripped by it. And so gripped by it that I found myself entering into a period of creative endeavor, of intense writing, which is the most intense that I've ever done, because the first full draft of this, which you can think of as 150 distinct poems, but is also, because they're all linked to each other, is kind of one poem of 2,250 lines. The first draft of it was completed in 2 months, basically over May and June.
That's amazing.
So that took me about, and I started to blog them. I started to post them on my blog. And again, my publisher, who I suppose must occasionally glance at my blog, took a look at them and basically sent me an email like, we have to publish this and we have to publish it as soon as possible. You know, get on with it.
That's good. And how do you,
clear your debt?
How do you, Malcolm, you have this beautiful way of that last line of one becomes the first line of the next, as Kim and I have read through.
This is actually what made me do it. I've been thinking I'll write some poetry about the Psalms. I hadn't got further than that. And anyway, I was also, I'd been reading a book about the history of prayer beads as a help, which you'd think about the rosary. But before the 50 beads, the 10 decades that you would say 3 times over, became associated with Mary in the High Middle Ages, they were originally corresponding with the Psalter. And they were a group of 5 chairs. And they were actually, for the lay brothers who couldn't read the whole psalm in Latin, were given short prayers which they would say, and then they'd count them off. And you went 3 times round and you'd done your 150.
That is amazing.
And I began to think I could make poems like little prayer beads. So I was reading that. And then what blew my mind was reading this book about the history of prayer beads. Because it's a circle, I read that it was sometimes called a corona or chaplet, because corona means crown. And I thought, wow. Then I remembered that the poet John Donne, whom I deeply admire, had written a little circlet of 7 poems about Christ called La Corona. So I went back and reread it. And I suddenly understood what a corona was poetically. Because the opening line of that sequence, he offers it to Christ, is deign at my hands this crown of prayer and praise. I receive from me this crown of prayer and praise. Then the last line of the first poem is the first line of the next.
That's
the last line of that is the first line of the next. And then the great thing is the final line in Donne's thing, the last line of the 7th poem is deign at my hands this crown of prayer and praise. It goes back. So I suddenly thought, maybe I could do this for the Psalms. I mean, it was a crazy thing. I mean, it's quite difficult to do it just with 7s on it. So, of course, before I could even begin, I needed to know how to end. In order to be able to write the poem for Psalm 1, I had to completely soak myself in Psalm 150.
Wow.
Which, of course, is a psalm of pure praise.
Yes.
And an invitation. And I suddenly, once I got this one line, which is come to the place where every breath is praise.
Yes.
And I suddenly realized that is the psalm means praise. I mean, the book of Psalms is the book of praises. And of course, there's much lament as well, but it begins and ends in praise.
Wow.
And once I'd got that basic idea, I knew how to do it. But it was also interesting because it meant each time, like if I were writing the poem on, on Psalm 19, let's say, I needed, in order to write the poem on Psalm 19, not only to read and meditate on Psalm 19, but also to read and meditate on Psalm 20.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I know that my landing place for the end of Psalm 19 has to be the springboard for the
That's
beginning
right.
of 20.
And I'm very
So-
excited because we're actually going to read in a little bit. We're going to read Psalm 1, Psalm 19, Psalm 22, leading into what's probably the most well-known psalm of all, Psalm 23. And we're going to read not only the Coverdale
course, they're
translation. Yeah, we're also going to read, we're going to have you read your poem. And then Kim is here, and she's done a response to your response in a visual art form.
Wow,
So
I
this
didn't
is-
realize-
we've never done anything like. Yeah.
I knew you'd I thought I was assuming you'd responded to the Psalms, Kim. I didn't realize you're also responding to the poem. That's wonderful.
No,
I'm
they're each one
delighted to hear that.
responding to your work. And I was going to say that the form that you allowed yourself, or the form that you disciplined yourself with, probably held your attention to reading the Psalms in a new way, I would think, because you had to think of that structure.
It did, yeah.
That for
No, the structure was very much the way in. And of course, I chose the form I chose. The actual name of technically of these sets of 3 verses, where
Right.
the 2 outer lines of the 3 rhyme, and then the middle one sets you up for the 2. It's
That's
called
an
terza
ABA.
rima, and it was invented by Dante.
Yeah.
So it's A, B, A. That's
Right.
one verse. Then the next verse is B, C, B.
right.
Then the C from that comes. Anyway, it's called terza rima, and of course, like the Corona form, it's interlinked.
Yes.
And I decided that I would use 5 verses of terza rima, so 5 threes. And of course, the reason for that is that it makes 15.
Right.
And because it's iambic pentameter, there are 10 syllables in every line.
Ah.
So each one of these is like a little model of the whole Psalter, because it's 150 uttered syllables. Raised.
This is also helpful because I think much like I paint in abstract mostly, and so people can respond to it and have an intuitive reaction. But when they begin to hear me describe what the symbols are or how I came about it or the method, it takes on more meaning. And I think for poetry, so many people, especially in America, we don't have a history of a discipline of reading poetry. And so to learn the inner structure of it and how things are linked
Brilliant.
from one to the other brings so much more meaning to then reading the poems. And also knowing the rhythm of it and hearing the sounding.
Yeah, the rhythm, the sound of it is very important. Of course, we were talking about music a little bit before we came on, and
Yes.
I think everybody hears the music of one kind or another. And of course, these are the songs of David in a way. You know, David in medieval illuminations is traditionally shown with his harp, and we have a musical instrument which is indeed called a psaltery. And the element, I mean, these are poems in the Old Testament, the element of song, and some of them are, of course, are addressed to the singers or to the leaders of the singers or
Right.
to the chief musician. So one of the things I love about the way our evening prayer is structured in the Church of England is that before we come to the Old Testament reading and then the New Testament reading, we sing a psalm, and we literally sing it. We have a choir singing it. And I think, in a way, you have to sing yourself into the scriptures to really know how to read them.
It reminds
the
me of,
singing part has to
I don't know
be-
if you're familiar with Nicholas Wolterstorff, but he wrote a book about art and
Yes.
action. And I was thinking about how the poems of the Psalms, they're working art. In other words, they're not simply for the enjoyment of contemplation, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they are also working art because they're bringing us to the throne room. They're expressing. And for the Hebrew poetry, the structure of it, it was for them to be able to remember it easily because they didn't have the tools that we have.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Poetry as an art form, certainly in the English tradition, works by a kind of echoing or repetition, which is the same but different. So when you rhyme, you have the same sound, but it's a different word. And that's where the pleasure is, the memory. I mean, a chap called Arthur Henry Hallam, a friend of Tennyson's, once said that all rhyme is a parley between memory and hope. That, you know,
Lovely.
when you first get the line, you have to hope for the rhyme that'll come, but you won't get the rhyme if you don't remember the one.
Right.
Anyway, C.S. Lewis makes a brilliant observation in his book Reflections on the Psalms, where he says, well, this idea of the same but different,
Right.
in an English poem, it's embodied in rhyme, and that's what makes the poem almost impossible to translate. But in the Hebrew poetry, you get these parallelisms, you know, Lord, open my lips and my mouth shall show forth my praise, you know, make me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me, where the same thought is expressed in different terms. And C.S. Lewis calls this thought rhyme. And then he says a brilliant thing. He says it was a divine providence that this particular form of this poetic form, in which doesn't depend on the sound of the word, but depends on the echo of the thought and image, means that this poetry can be successfully translated
Yeah.
Yes.
and still be as poetic as it was to begin.
What do you know about when you think about ancient Hebrew poetry, Malcolm, compared to, you know, more contemporary forms? But like with Psalm 119, for instance, we have a psalm that it's the longest chapter in our Bibles, right? And they somehow or another memorize these things. Is there a device employed there? I believe with the Hebrew alphabet.
Oh, well, in Psalm 119, of course, it's acrostic. There are a couple of acrostic psalms, but in Psalm 119, which of course, as you know, it's a great paean in praise of the law. It's about how sweet the law is, about how nourishing. It's about Torah. By law, I mean here Torah, the whole thing. So it's a thanksgiving for the extraordinary gift of a written scripture, for what was given to Moses. So the poetic technique is to use every letter of the Hebrew alphabet and make one. If you look at the sections, there's a letter of the alphabet alphabetically above each of the little sections within Psalm 119. And I remember thinking when I came to it, golly, how am I going to do Psalm 119? Because obviously my poetic form involves 15 lines, 5 tercets for each psalm, whether it's a mega long psalm or whether it's the shortest psalm, you know, it could be 131 or whatever. So I decided that I would do the same thing. I would write a poem about how the letters of the law are transformed in Christ into love's alphabet.
Wow.
But what I decided to do was to construct my poem so that the complete alphabet was used in alphabetical order as a thing winding through it. And if you look at it in the book,
Wow.
So if you look, you probably don't think you can see it on this page, but you can probably just about see it here. If you see certain letters there are in bold.
Yes.
And if you go through them, it literally goes from A to Z down the poem.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And that was my little tribute to the poetic technique of Psalm 119. Took a bit of thinking about, I have to say.
Oh my goodness.
Perhaps that didn't just flow.
But that, I mean, I don't know. It was about the core of that psalm is, well, I mean, I'll just read you a few lines from it just because I think it goes into the heart of what we're talking about these scriptures. And of course, the radical way we reread the Psalms in the light of Christ, the way his light brings things up. So the poem is about how my soul delights to study your word and to keep your word. I mean, the Psalm 119. So blessed are the ones who in the course of life desire to find and keep that way, who give themselves to studying his word. Joy shall lead them, knowledge make their way so plain before their eyes. The perfect Lord comes down. Now this is where it becomes Christian. Up to that, I'm just reflecting what it says. And then I say this. The perfect Lord comes down to quicken us, restore our soul, remove the veil we place over his word, and fix our eyes on mercy as the whole and only meaning of the law. To prove and to fulfill that truth, his heart and soul were poured out when he came down from above, that all the letters in the law of Zion might now become the alphabet of love.
Ah, it's brilliant.
And
I love that.
Sort of love
There's the gospel right there. There's the gospel, you know. It's God in pursuit of a people he can call his own. Yeah. I love the process you're talking about. It parallels a lot, like with Kim's work here that we'll see in a few minutes here. Nihonga is a process. Kim, that's a process-oriented form, isn't it?
Yes, and in a similar way to having different forms for poetry, it puts up certain restrictions. And it's always the challenge to work within the restrictions to bring the fullness out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
you know,
I think
brilliant.
the restrictions are precisely what bring out creativity. It's
Absolutely.
coming up against the limit and having being forced to think. That's why I think a lot of free verse actually, apart from not having music in it, doesn't really work because
Right.
it's not pushing back at the creator and making them come up with something better.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
There's a character called Autolycus in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale who talks about poetry, and he says the poetry is a current that flies each bound it chafes. And the image is of a river flowing in a well-cut channel, which has got so much energy that it's when it hits the bank and turns, that's when the fine spray goes up and all the beauty of it happens.
Yes.
Whereas if there was no channel or bank, it would just be a big spludgy puddle.
Well, and that
But it
tension,
flies each bound it chafes.
that tension is what I think provokes the artist or the writer. That tension provokes curiosity. And curiosity is the seedbed for creativity. And without those boundaries and without
Absolutely.
those structures, we don't have that push towards curiosity that will then bring forth fruit.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
And I love the way that the work that you do has inspired wonder, I think, as well. There's a sense in which you stir that up. And the Psalms do this as well. I can't tell you how many times I've fallen down on my knees before my little what do you call it, recliner chair, and just read a psalm. And I didn't know why I was so burned out and fried, but in my mind and in my heart, I'm sitting there and I'm reading this psalm that stirs the emotions, that stimulates the imagination, and I think helps to inform my mind and my heart at the same time. All of a sudden, I read something. And it's so refreshing because it expresses some human emotion or some feeling that I had no idea that the Bible would actually speak to.
It's Seamus Heaney who said that the poetry teaches us to listen for the song or the melody that we never even knew that we needed to listen for.
Yes, that's right. And he has a great phrase. He says we have to listen to the music of what happens. That's that's absolutely right. And I find the Psalms doing that for me again, particularly the nature Psalms.
Yes.
That I'm brought, as it were, to the brink of what I thought I knew, and then I see something shining through them.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have a brilliant way. Jim and I have often talked about the importance of both verities and mysteries. Verities bring us to the mountain, and mysteries give us wings for the ascent. You have been able to merge theologian and poet in a way that is understandable, approachable, appealing. Even your book, Parable and Paradox, putting those two odd things together. And in the church, I think oftentimes we've embraced the theologian, but been nervous about the poet or the artist, and that adding that into theology. How has that worked for you? How have you managed that?
Well, I think we need to bring. I mean, theology is a very proper discipline, and I like calling theology the queen of the sciences. There's an intellectual rigor and a proper use of reason in theology, and that's very important. But what I think happened in the Enlightenment was that we did a big split between reason and imagination, and we kind of downgraded and downplayed imagination in order to have a certain kind of reason. But actually, reason and imagination are both God-given faculties of the soul, and they're both potentially truth-bearing faculties. In fact, C.S. Lewis famously said that whilst reason is the natural organ of truth, imagination is the organ of meaning.
Yes.
And reason can tell you loads of stuff that's true, but it doesn't tell you what it means. You have to reimagine it and put yourself in it. And so I think we need to restore both. And of course, poets are the wardens and stewards of the imagination and the trainers of it. So what we need is what, again, to borrow a phrase from C.S. Lewis,
Yes.
we need a baptized imagination. He talks about when he was still an atheist, but he was reading George MacDonald on the train, he felt somehow that his imagination was baptized. And he more or less says in that book, Surprised by Joy, my imagination was baptized before I was, and the rest of me just had to catch up.
Yes.
And that's more or less my story as well. It was coming, things through poetry. I was an atheist shading into agnostic when I came up as an undergraduate in 1977 on a scholarship to read English literature, to study English literature at Cambridge. And I was a Christian by the time I'd finished that 3 years. But it was the poets that warmed my heart, before the theologians could then speak to my reason.
You in fact said something about that the poetry turned the dry twigs green. Lucy Shaw talks about the prodigal green, and how for you those poets began to soften what was brittle.
Yeah, that's right. And they keep alive the heart in the head, as it were, to borrow another phrase of Coleridge's. That's right. Yeah. And so I felt, and of course, until the 18th century, until the Enlightenment period, there was a natural marriage between the church and the arts, all the arts, poetry as well as the visual arts. And so you and I, Kim, in bringing poetry and painting back to the service of the church, we're not inventing something new.
Exactly.
We're not going on some trendy little side trip. We're reuniting things which should never have been divided in the first place.
There you go.
So we're in the business of recovery.
So there.
Renewal, rather than innovation.
Walter Brueggemann said, the key pathology of our time, which seduces us all, is the reduction of the imagination so that we are too numbed, satiated, and co-opted to do serious imaginative work. And in this era of technology, which can be so beautiful, it has stripped away the opportunity for quiet contemplative understanding or even embracing that practice.
I love what you guys are saying there too. When I think about the modern world in which we live and the sort of fancy for expressive individualism, it seems like, and maybe you guys can help me out with this, but it seems like we do more expressing and less listening. And yet at the same time, I feel like we should be talking to ourselves and not listening to ourselves so much. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, totally. I'll tell you, talking about all this tech stuff, and we've had to do all these Zoom things. There's a phrase that flashed up the first time I used it on Zoom, which seared into my mind as being actually a spiritual directive, something you should see in prayer. So the phrase, purely tech phrase, it said, "Your host has muted you." And I suddenly thought maybe that's where we should get to in prayer. Like you're just banging on together. But this little thing flashes up and says, "Your host has muted you." Shut up and listen.
It reminds me from the Psalms, "Be still and know that I'm God."
I'm God, well, that's kind of it. Also, I think, I was going to say the opening psalm is very much about being rooted.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly where I wanted to go. That's where I wanted to go. Can we try one together? Can we do Psalm 1? And I'll read from the Coverdale translation, which, by the way, that goes back to what, 16th century, Malcolm?
Yeah, 16th century. I think it was 1535 or 36.
Okay.
So it was there already before the Book of Common Prayer. I mean, our Book of Common Prayer is, 1662, but actually, this had already been there for a long time, the Coverdale. It's a beautiful translation.
Wonderful.
I mean, obviously there are more accurate ones and all that, but what I love about it is the rhythm.
Yeah.
I think it's most perfect rhythmically.
Well, let's try this one together.
So do you want to read it in Coverdale?
Yeah, I'll read it in Coverdale, and then Malcolm will read the poem, and then Kim, if you'll show us one of the pieces that's a response to Malcolm's poem, I think that'd just be brilliant. Here's the Coverdale.
This is one time when that old principle of playing telephone, I'll tell you something and then you tell someone else something and then they tell someone. It actually multiplies the experience rather than detracts from, I think.
Malcolm, I'm going to let you tell us the Latin superscription, if you don't mind, and what that means. I have no Latin in me, so.
Those Latin superscriptions are literally, because Coverdale was radically new at the time and everybody else already knew the Psalms in Latin. They knew them by just the opening line. So like Beatus vir qui non habit is literally blessed is the man that hath not sat in the seats of the scornful.
Okay, all right,
Beatus
there you
vir is
go.
blessed, but it's very good because it's a beatitude. I mean, so in the Latin of the New Testament, you know, all those blessed are the poor, blessed are the, all began with the word beatus. So
yeah,
this is a
great.
beatitude.
This is wonderful. Well, if someone is looking for the flourishing life or the blessed life or what's the good life look like, as you say, we've got this beautiful word. All right, I'll just read the Coverdale version, and then Malcolm, you pick right up, and then Kim will follow up. Here's Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that hath not walked in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stood in the way of sinners, and hath not sat in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law will he exercise himself day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the waterside that will bring forth his fruit in due season. His leaf also shall not wither, and look, whatsoever he doeth, it shall prosper. As for the ungodly, it is not so with them. But they are like the chaff which the wind scattereth away from the face of the earth. Therefore the ungodly shall not be able to stand in the judgment, neither the sinners in the congregation of the righteous. But the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, and the way of the ungodly shall perish.
Right. So, Psalm 1, Beatus vir. Come to the place where every breath is praise, and God is breathing through each passing breeze. Be planted by the waterside, and raise your arms with Christ beneath these rooted trees, who lift their breathing leaves up to the skies. Be rooted too, as still and strong as these, open alike to sun and rain. Arise from meditation by these waters. Bear the fruit of that deep rootedness. Be wise in the tree's long wisdom. Learn to share the secret of their patience. Pass the day in their green fastness and their quiet air. Slowly discern a life, a truth, a way, where simple being flowers in delight. Then let the chaff of life just blow away.
Love that closing line.
Brilliant.
Well, I responded to your poems each time. I read them over and over until there were words that came back each time. And so for this painting, being planted and the breath of God breathing through everything, those two things connected for me. And on the painting, you can see a breath of blue behind everything. And that sort of symbolizes the breath of God behind everything. Then, of course, the deep blue at the bottom, the being rooted by the water, and the malachite, the green that raises above it. And then the ultimate is the aged silver leaf is the large area in the middle. And that's the fruit that is born from being planted by the waters and rooted. And silver leaf is aged there because wisdom is hard earned. It isn't just given. And so I apply a chemical and fire to the silver to accomplish that tone. And then the two lines that are headed up, that's raise your arms with the trees in praise.
Great. I've got the picture up on the screen here. It's lovely to hear all that explication. It's a beautiful picture.
And one last thing was the chaff. I have the chaff blowing away because I just loved that closing line. So I've just sprinkled pigment flying off the edges.
Very good. Yeah. That's really, really nice.
I love that phrase also, Malcolm. The tree's long wisdom. That was a beautiful spoke to me, and especially in the time of pandemic and isolation. And I'm an extrovert, a relative extrovert, I would say. Kim is more of an introvert, but I've discovered that even my introvert wife is kind of fed up with the isolation, and she's ready to be with people.
I may have fooled you on that a little bit, but
Well, it just after a while, I love this, that over time we experience things and we open up to new things, and I think that's really true. The tree's long wisdom.
Because the poetry is as much as anything about the transition from psalm to psalm, I needed to compose the poems in the order of the psalms. I couldn't just I'll go to Psalm 19, my favorite psalm, or something like that.
Right.
So this was the first poem, and I composed a lot of them mentally while walking. And there's my favorite spot on my morning walk is a little bridge at a place called Little Linton, just over the stream of the Granta, and there's a beautiful tree, just great chestnut tree near the water. And I stood on the bridge several mornings just contemplating the psalm and the tree until the poem formed itself. So it was very much located in a particular place for me.
that's
Wow,
beautiful.
that's wonderful. Well, shall we try Psalm 19? You mentioned that. It's certainly one of the most beautiful hymns of praise. And if I could read the Coverdale version and you could read your response poem, Malcolm, that'd be so lovely. And Kim has a painting that goes so well with
C.S.
that.
Lewis reflections on the Psalms. I think C.S. Lewis says this is one of the finest poems in the whole of Western literature.
That's right.
Psalm 19,
Yeah.
just considered as a poem itself. It was Lewis's favorite psalm for lots of reasons, but it's great. Lovely. Let's hear it in the Coverdale.
Coverdale. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. One day telleth another, and one night certifieth another. There is neither speech nor language, but their voices are heard among them. Their sound is gone out into all lands, and their words into the ends of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which cometh forth as a bridegroom out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a giant to run his course. It goeth forth from the uttermost part of the heaven, and runneth about unto the end of it again. And there's nothing hid from the heat thereof. The law of the Lord is an undefiled law, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, and giveth wisdom unto the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, and rejoice the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, and giveth light unto the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, and endureth forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant taught, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can tell how oft he offendeth? O cleanse thou me from my secret faults. Keep thy servant also from presumptuous sins, lest they get the dominion over me. So shall I be undefiled and innocent from the great offense. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Beautiful.
Wonderful. So Psalm 19, Caeli, enarrant. In that still place where earth and heaven meet under mysterious starlight, raise your head and gaze up at their glory, the complete consort dancing, as one poet said of his own words. But these are all God's words, a shining poem waiting to be read afresh in every heart. Now, look towards the brightening east and see the splendid sun rise and rejoice, the icon of his Lord's true light. Be joyful with him. Watch him run his course. Receive the treasure of his light, pouring like honeyed gold till day is done, as sweet and strong as all God's laws, as right as all his judgments, and as clean and pure. All given for your growth and your delight.
That's wonderful.
So beautiful. As I listened to it and as I read it over and over, obviously, this is a song of praise and the heavens declaring his glory. And so I used a technique here that looks a little bit like, for me, life forming. And there's cells and reactions. There's the heaven and earth meeting in the light and the dark. There's the bright daylight as opposed to the warm evening. The explosion of stars is the gold splatter across the sky, all teeming with life. And then I loved the line, the treasure of his light pouring like honeyed gold till day is done. And that's what that swath down on the bottom left is, that honey gold that I so long for throughout the day. There was a time when the time of day between day and night was a struggle for me with depression. And yet now I've come to see the beautiful transition. And the honey daylight spills into the night through the stars.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful painting again. I love the sort of dark blue and blacks of that night sky and the kind of scattering, as it were, of the stars and the gold there, as well as the honeyed gold pouring down on the side.
That's wonderful.
It's beautiful in the original psalm. It's a real example of poetic technique, where the first part of the psalm is about the sun. It's about the stars and then the sun rejoicing and running his course and all of that. And then, with no explanation or transition, just a sheer artistic juxtaposition, he says, the law of the Lord is pure and gold and reaches. And it's only as you begin to read the second half of the hymn that praises the law, the Torah,
Right.
you suddenly see that everything he said about the sun, everything he said about it is true of the law. The sun he's the emblem of the law. So he gives you the beautiful thing first, and then he gently shows you how the beautiful thing is more than itself.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, he said that at the beginning. He said the heavens are telling of the glory of God. There's no speech, but he's actually, in the last part of the psalm, he's translating for you the speech of the heavens.
Beautiful.
I mean, when I said that these are all God's words, a shining poem waiting to be read, I was partly riffing on a famous moment in Coleridge's poem Frost at Midnight, where he talks about the secret ministry of frost, where he imagines his little boy Hartley growing up, really in the midst of nature and seeing the mountains and the crags. And he has this beautiful thing. He says, talking about the child seeing the sun and the moon and the stars and the mountains and the lakes, he says, so shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who doth teach himself in all and all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mould thy spirit and by giving make it ask. Wow. And it seemed to me Psalm 19 is like a perfect example of that.
Oh, yeah.
That's beautiful.
I love the way we have a wisdom psalm with Psalm 1. We have, perhaps you'd call it a hymn of praise, always, bringing everything back around, everything we experience, everything we see and observe, bringing that back around to the one who created it all, to our the one that our hearts long for so much.
And it tracks us from general revelation to more specific revelation in the Word. And just to see that woven into the Psalms, and then the way that you've pulled that out with your fresh take on it is beautiful. As
beautiful as the signs are, signs are things that point to something else. They aren't the point themselves. And
the signs, they point beyond themselves,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And of course, in the end, as Christians, we know, whereas here the sun points to the Torah, but in the end, we know that the sun is really all these things, and the Torah itself are pointing to Christ.
Yes.
So that's why in the poem, I call the sun an icon. I said, watch the sun. It says, I call him the icon of his Lord's true light. And I'm thinking of John's prologue, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has never overcome it. In him was light. So that even the sun in all its glory is only a little outer image of the true light of Christ.
That's right.
But it is an image of the true light of Christ. It's the icon of Christ.
The
And
reflection.
you connect all of that, I think, when you start to also know he's the Word, he's the Logos, the right. We have
Yeah, exactly.
That's the specific.
we have these images, and it's because really God and Christ so beautiful, hard to explain with just one set of images, right? We are our minds are blown, our eyes are popping out, our heart is thumping when we begin to get a glimpse of him, I think.
As you say, the following Psalms after 19, 20 is a coronation, 20, 21 coronation Psalms. Then we get into the very Psalms that Christ has on his lips.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, 22,
Yes.
That's
45th verse, and then you're into 23.
Well, let's take. May I abridge that just a little? It's quite lengthy on the Coverdale version, and I read.
No, it's a very long. I mean, I riffed on a few phrases in the Coverdale, but no, I think people can go back to the Psalm after this, can't they, and read the whole of it if they want to. I think
Yes. I'd like to just abridge part of it. And Psalm 22 is perhaps what we might consider a lament. Some of you will be familiar with the fact that the lament Psalms, actually quite a few of the Psalms are lament, right, Malcolm?
Yeah, they are indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's very important. And that was another thing that made them come alive during this lockdown. That they tell God what it's like. They're completely uninhibited. There's no holding back from God how bad this feels to us now.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us license to express our lament, a positive invitation to do so. And I too also struggle sometimes with experiences of quite profound depression. And again, the Psalms, 130 De Profundis, out of the depths have I called to you, they give voice to that.
That's so true. I love the way, I think it's Athanasius that said these Psalms not only speak to us, but they speak for us in so many ways, and they give voice to what we're...
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's read the Coverdale. I'll abridge it, and then Malcolm will read Psalm 22, his response. And most of you will be familiar with especially the opening verse here. My God, look upon me. Why hast thou forsaken me? And art so far from my health and from the words of my complaint. O my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season also I take no rest. And thou continuest holy, O thou worship of Israel. O fathers, our fathers hoped in thee. They trusted in thee, and thou didst deliver them. They called upon thee and were holpen. They put their trust in thee and were not confounded. But as for me, I am a worm and no man, a very scorn of men and the outcast of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot their lips and shake their heads, saying, He trusted in God that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him if he will have him. And I'll drop to verse 14. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart also in the midst of my body is even like melting wax. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my gums, and thou shalt bring me into the dust of death. For many dogs are come about me, and the counsel of the wicked layeth siege against me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I may tell all my bones. They stand staring and looking upon me. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. And down to verse 23. Oh, praise the Lord, ye that fear him. Magnify him, all ye of the seed of Jacob, and fear him, all ye seed of Israel. For he hath not despised nor abhorred the low estate of the poor. He hath not hid his face from him. But when he called unto him, he heard him. My praise is of thee in the great congregation. My vows will I perform in the sight of them that fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. They that seek after the Lord shall praise him. Your heart shall live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember themselves and be turned unto the Lord. And all the kindreds of the nations shall worship before him, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the people. All such as be fat upon earth have eaten and worshipped. All they that go down into the dust shall kneel before him, and no man hath quickened his own soul. My seed shall serve him. They shall be counted unto the Lord for a generation. They shall come, and the heavens shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born, whom the Lord hath made.
Wonderful. And of course, that final verse is where we come in. We are the people that shall be born, whom the Lord hath made,
That's right.
who will come in and who will realize that what this psalm, the psalmist didn't know that this psalm was going to become the anthem of the crucifixion, and that therefore the promises at the end of it would be the promises of resurrection.
Yes.
But I very much in my response, I mean, the key, in fact, there's a line in this response which is kind of key to the way I've approached the whole Psalter in this book. And that line is, Christ himself is crying through this psalm. That I hear the voice of Christ again and again in the Psalms. So, Psalm 22, Deus, Deus meus. My God, my God. Before he shares with us the golden crown, he comes to share with us the crown of thorns. Our hurts and hates close in and hem him round, mock and humiliate him. All the scorns with which we blaspheme God in one another are concentrated here, among the horns of unicorns, the lions' mouths, the slather of our devouring wickedness. He takes it all and turns it into love. He gathers all of us and by atonement makes our peace with God. He speaks to us of mercy even as we pierce him. No one slakes his thirst. I tremble at the mystery, for Christ himself is crying through this psalm to suffer my own dereliction for me.
Wow.
This is such a moving psalm, and your response even more so. I have to admit that lament, I speak that language more naturally than I would like to. And so this is one of the easier ones to respond to and to paint. But what I was struck by is the golden crown surrounded by hurts and hates and sins. And so the painting is surrounded by marks and marks, strong ones, weak ones, all measuring time and emotion. And yet, even proportionally, the uglier, the less beautiful parts of the painting, or the majority of the painting, what your eye still sees is at the center, that gold, because even in the midst of art, that is what still shines through all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, because in the Psalter, 22 is preceded. Psalm 21 is a coronation psalm, which specifically mentions a golden crown, and that's why I picked up on that line. But also, for us now, the crown of thorns in Latin is corona spinia. There's a missa corona spinia. And I somehow feel our own sufferings now are part of the crown of thorns. But I just love the fact that we have to read 21 before we can read 22. And you've got that beautifully in your picture with that gold right there in the center. We have to see that in order to be able to bear the rest of it.
Yes, exactly.
And leading into the next one, I know, Malcolm, your last line of your poem will be the first line then of your response to Psalm 23, which I'll read in the Coverdale.
So I think there's something to be said about the particular sequence, if I may, of 21, 22, 23. So 21 gives us a picture of the Messiah crowned in glory in heaven. That's the joy that was set before him, for which he went to the cross. 22 takes you to the cross in all its horror.
That's right.
And then this extraordinary thing in 23. You can't, this is one of the things where I really believe in the inspiration, poetic and divine inspiration of the Old Testament. To say the Lord is my shepherd, and then to say, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, in the Holy Land, the shepherds don't drive the sheep from behind. They lead them from the front. Mm. So that's actually saying, I know God will go before me through death. Mm-hmm. How could David say that before the coming of Christ? And yet he knew that the shepherd would come, and that's what the shepherd would have to do. Mm. And Jesus totally identifies with it when he says, the good shepherd. So to me, it's astonishing that 23 is 23 and comes after 22.
Yeah.
Because it's only 22 that makes it possible for me to say, yes,
yeah.
Though I walk through that valley, I know you're there. You've been through this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just threw that in.
No, that's great.
Let's hear 23
that's great, because David, who was a shepherd boy, spent so much time with his sheep, really knew what it was like to be a sheep. And here he comes saying, I need a shepherd too.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
well, let me read the Coverdale one, and so many folks will be familiar with this one. And I like Malcolm, I would say, don't allow familiarity to breed indifference on this. This is such a beautiful, powerful psalm, and I don't know where people may be at in this pandemic period, but I need this shepherd every hour. I need him, and so let these words be of comfort to you. The Lord is my shepherd. Therefore can I lack nothing. He shall feed me in a green pasture and lead me forth beside the waters of comfort. He shall convert my soul and bring me forth in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou shalt prepare a table before me against them that trouble me. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, and my cup shall be full. But thy loving kindness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Beautiful.
Beautiful. So here's my sort of prayerful poetic response to that. Psalm 23, Dominus regit me. To suffer my own dereliction for me, to be my shepherd, and to lead me through the grave and gate of death, in strength and mercy, Christ has come down. At last, I've found the true shepherd, and the false just fade away before him. I will sing of how he drew me from the snares I set myself, how day dawned on my darkness, how he brought me forth, converted me, and opened up the way for me, and led me gently on that path, led me beside still waters, promised me that he'd be with me all my days on earth, and when my last day comes, accompany and comfort me as evening shadows fall, and draw me into his eternity.
Wow.
So in a way, my response to that psalm was also a kind of personal confession of faith. It's kind of, in a sense, I don't do a lot of first person, testimony type stuff, but I am somebody who did need to be rescued. And I'd put myself in a very foolish place in my life at the time that I became a Christian. And I really do feel that I'm talking the literal truth when I say he drew me from the snares I set myself, day dawned on my darkness. He brought me forth, converted me, and opened up my way. I can testify to that happening.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to find, as Athanasius said, he speaks for me. This
That's
psalm
right.
is speaking for me.
And
That's great.
It's actually a beautiful confession of sin, too, that he pulled me from the snares I made myself.
Exactly.
The generosity of grace. So in this piece that I've painted, I hope that the effect when you look at it overall is peaceful, because I think this psalm brings so much peace ultimately into what is not always a peaceful life. And so the balance of space relates to that. But I also know, I don't know if you're familiar with the tetrachord in music, but it is the device that's used to create lament in music. And it has a 4-chord system. And so if you look at the piece, there is the rod and staff is fairly clear. The 2 descending brush marks over on the left side, the rod and the staff. And then the blue is the, he leads me beside still waters, but they're not always. They're the shadow, the valley of the shadow of death. And so they're descending in 4 steps like the tetrachord, which is that lament that comes through that. And then it breaks through the golden squares because death has a beauty because of him breaking through the power of death. And so those squares sort of explode out.
Wow.
That's lovely. Yeah. It's also sort of breaking down the dividing wall as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's lovely. Yeah. I also love the movement just as an artistic composition between the sinuous flow of the blue line of the water and indeed of the rod and staff, and then the geometrical exactitude of the squares. I like the contrast between those two.
Oh, yeah, the contrast. That's great. Yeah. The materials allow for that, and the brush allows for that contrast, the hard edge of the leaf compared to the softer information that comes from the brush.
Yeah, the sort of sinuous rills. Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's great.
Well, it's delightful to know that you've made these as much in response to the poems as to the Psalms.
Oh,
I didn't grasp that when we were corresponding, so I'm honoured. I think that it's really lovely to see that. Well, I love it when art begets art, as it were.
There you go.
When a creative thing in creates another.
Ironically, I did my master's thesis, my master's project on a similar thing. I discussed the concept of that how people learn, how people hear, 3 different ways: explicit, implicit, and intuitive. And the explicit, I did a more verse by verse teaching of a passage, and then the implicit, I wrote more of a narrative homily about the passage. And then for the intuitive, I painted an abstract painting of that same passage. And I think in a way that's what we've been doing here today as well. It just kind of hit me.
So wonderful. Well, Malcolm, we don't want to keep you all day, but thank you so much for this time and for being with us and sharing with us. I want to remind everybody about this book here, David's Crown, the Psalms, his responses and reflections on 150 Psalms. That's all of them. And just a wonderful book. We have so enjoyed it here. There are other books by Malcolm. I want to encourage you to look those up as well. We've enjoyed Waiting on the Word, Malcolm, having just come through Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany on the church calendar. We've also enjoyed Word in the Wilderness, a poem a day for Lent and for Easter. Some folks may want to check that out. And you did a thing called Quarantine Quatrains. I didn't actually see that on Amazon, but was that available through the?
No, it's not, because it hasn't been sort of published in a book yet. What we did when I wrote it, I wanted to do something for the care workers, the frontline care workers in our community. So we did a limited fine print edition because it has beautiful paintings by the English artist Roger Wagner as well. So we just did a limited run of 600, which we signed and all the profits of that went to the care workers charity. And eventually my publisher will bring it out as a proper book, but or include it probably in my next collection of poems. But in the meantime, so people can have it, I have put it on my blog. So if you kind of do the search on my blog for Quarantine Quatrains, there's a post that I posted the sections separately, but there's one post on there which says the full set, or Quarantine Quatrains, the full poem, and it's fully on there. As I wrote those, just the final part was a kind of elegy and lament for those who've died, and particularly for the care workers who'd given their lives and got COVID whilst caring for others. So I wanted, once I realized that it finished with this elegy, I felt I should dedicate the whole poem to them. And that's how that happened. So in another year or two, I'll publish it in my own right. But in the meantime, I just wanted to do this limited run as a gift to the charity.
Well, some folks may also want to, as Kim and I have so often now, join Malcolm on his YouTube channel for the visits in the library. I hope, Malcolm, while they were sort of begun here during this quarantine time, I hope you'll continue those on afterwards once things clear up, because we've grown so fond of them. And you'll.
Yeah, I think I will. Quite a lot of people have written to me to ask me to keep it going, so I probably will. Yeah. I quite enjoy doing it.
That's so good, and it shows that you do.
To learn.
I wanted to say too that Dorothy Sayers says a poet is someone who can't go to bed before writing a song about it, and I think that is true too, and that probably everything you see is a song or poem.
That's great. That's so good.
It is absolutely. Yeah.
And Malcolm, the website, we'll post that up there on screen as well, malcolmguite.com, pretty straight ahead there. I hope folks will join you there and visit. And
then if they then click on the blog, they'll get whatever the latest poems are.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us for the Village Chapel Friday Night Chats. And it's such a delight to meet you and make your acquaintance. We'll look forward to seeing you when you come to Nashville then.
I hope to come to Nashville near the end of the year if all goes well.
Wonderful.
That'd be great.
Wonderful. We'd love to have you at the church with us as well. So until next time, thank you for joining us, folks, here at Friday Night Chats by the Village Chapel. And we invite you to join the Village Chapel as well at the website, thevillagechapel.com. And you're welcome to all of the resources that are available on our YouTube channel as well. Until next time, God bless you. Thank you for being with us.
Enjoyed it, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In green pastures he makes me lie down. He restores my soul and leads me on for his name, for his great name. And surely goodness, surely mercy, right beside me